Welcome back to another installment of Ask Eddie and Anne. Anne, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm working on our newsletter, so I'm like a little um, in two places at once.
Okay, but you seem to be in the pink, so to speak. Ha ha
Yes, I
ha.
am in the pink.
Yes, that's I can't quite tell what that is. It looks like a cross between a football jersey and sleepover wear. I don't know what.
Yeah, it's a t-shirt, and the styles like they do the style of t-shirts, which I really like the way they cut, but they kind of look a little like a sports shirt with the stripes on the
And
side.
it seems so cute and innocent until I recognize there's like a skull and crossbones on there, and so I'm assuming it's somewhat horror related.
Yes, it is a commentator on YouTube that I really like called Drum Dums. So
Drum Dums. Okay.
yes, and he knows he's very enthusiastic about horror films, and he's also a handsome ex-Marine Southern gentleman. So that doesn't hurt.
Okay, very good. I maybe I'll check this out, maybe not.
Unless you're
But
really into horror films, I'm not sure it'd be that great.
um I mean I watch them. I watch them when Kathleen is away.
Yeah.
She does not like horror films at all. And so I kind of have a queue with them backlogged. Stuff I've heard is good, and then I'll watch them when she's not around. So obviously during COVID, I didn't watch too many because we were kind of stuck in the house together the whole 2 years. So I'm behind on my horror films. Anyway, I'm excited because things are starting to get back to normal. The Noir City Festival up here in Oakland this year was very successful. I enjoyed that very much. I think the fans that came out were fantastic. We had pretty much full houses the whole time, and now we're about to do it very shortly in Hollywood as well. So we're getting back in the swing of things. If people are on the fence about going to the Hollywood Festival, I wish they'd jump off because things are changing. It's tough to fill a theater these days, for movie shows, just because people are so. I think COVID made them so spoiled to watch everything streaming that they're not quite ready to go back to a theater. I felt very, very fortunate that we had big houses up in Oakland, and I'd love to see something approximating that in Hollywood at the American Legion Post, where we're doing it this year. The Egyptian is being renovated, so there are no shows there. So we're out of our usual home at the Egyptian and over at the Hollywood Legion Post. So that should be fun. The advantage of which is there's a bar. That's the number one advantage. There's a bar downstairs, and it's pretty cool. It's a good venue, so I hope people come out.
Yeah, and I had some comments on North City in Oakland that we did this year that people really liked that the bar and mezzanine had so much space, which it was nice. It makes a difference.
Well, it certainly does. It was great because I was very concerned about how people would react to returning to a full house with still the specter of COVID looming over everything. So yes, that added space in the mezzanine and even in the main lobby was a real advantage. And I just want to give kudos to the audience. We packed the place with the loyalists. We sold over 350 all access passports, which was pretty great. I mean, that's not far off what we were selling typically before COVID. So that was really terrific. But people managed it themselves very well. Everybody played nice together. And although there was a proof of vaccine required, but once you were in the venue, people were kind of left to their own devices as to whether they wanted to wear the mask all the time or not. And the people that did not sort of ventured off to areas of the auditorium where there was, where they weren't close in with other people. So it all kind of worked out very well. So that was nice. We have a nice, respectful and mature audience that played well together, and I was very grateful for that.
Yeah, and we also had great weather, which was nice too.
Indeed. And you know, I don't want to dwell on it, but some people who were like, Oakland, seriously? I
Yeah.
just, I wish they could get over it because the neighborhood was great. You know, it wasn't that difficult to access. It's right off the freeway. Uh, you know, I parked, I didn't have preferred parking, right? And I just parked, you know, within an easy walk of the theater every night. So it was not, it was very convenient. And you know, I'm almost 100% certain we will go back to the Grand Lake because they were very hospitable and collaborative hosts.
Which makes life easier. So you ready to start doing questions?
You bet. You bet.
What are some lost noir films that you would love to find? And that's from Damon.
Okay, Damon. I hate to be vague when I answer this question, which we've gotten before, but I always say that I don't know what they are yet. I mean, we have a good idea about certain films and what elements exist on those films, and very often it's a challenge to like, are we going to wait and see if we can find more and better original elements before we start a restoration? Or do we just dive in and do it? I mean, in the past, I'm not going to say we've been burned, but where there have been instances where we have felt like we found all we're going to find. And then we do a restoration, then several years later, we find even better material that we could have worked with. And you feel kind of like kicking yourself in those instances. So when we have located a film and we know we have sufficient elements to do a restoration, very often we're like waiting. But we also, you know, I don't like to talk about these too far in advance because I'm afraid people will either jump the gun on it or they'll start shoving it all up on YouTube in inferior copies and saying, why are they restoring that? Perfectly good copy on YouTube, you know, which really is aggravating. And you know, I wasn't going to go here, but I'm going to just say this. I may have even said this last time, I don't know. But I'm really had it up to here with the people who are stealing restorations that other entities, whether it's the Film Noir Foundation or Kino or the Film Foundation or UCLA or Flicker Alley, spend money on these restorations, and then there are these pirates who come along, cut off the restoration credits, and upload the films to YouTube and claim that they've done the restoration and that you should provide them with funding through a Kickstarter or something so that you can see more of these restorations on YouTube. And, you know, it's absurd. These people are just thieves who are lying about having done the restorations, and they think they can get away with it because in many cases the films we've restored, you know, are quote unquote in the public domain. But once you go to all this trouble of making the restoration is sort of protected, right? Because we've created a new version of the film that has been completely restored through all these wonderful people that provide us the money to do this, and then for somebody else to just swoop in and say, we did the restoration, and they cut off our thing and put theirs up there is, oh boy, does that irritate me. Anyway, that's we Damon, we have films that we're working on right now, and there are films that we don't know about yet. That's the great discovery, is very often films that are not known at all are the ones where we'll find out about it, but the people who advise us of the existence of this film have no way of locating any original elements or anything. So that's where we come in. It's like, have you ever seen this, you know, Brazilian film from 1958 or something? And it's like they've only seen it in a really, really poor copy. And then that'll be something that we'll discover and go off in search of the elements and hope that we can find enough to do a proper restoration. That's just an example. They're not all from Brazil. Don't worry about it. All right. So, Anne, I'm going to, 2 questions from Steve.
Sure.
Steve recalled that we had mentioned a Paramount fire that destroyed a bunch of films, including the only known print of Woman on the Run that we rescued. Were any other noir films lost in that fire? Well, Steve, that was Universal that had the fire, not Paramount, and that was back. I think that was in 2008. And very quickly, I'm just happy to say that not that I am aware of. I mean, films that I had shown that were up front in the circulating part of the vault, like Johnny Stool Pigeon and Shakedown and Woman on the Run, and a few others, the prints were lost in that fire. But like good stewards, Universal wasn't stupid, and they didn't keep their negatives of these films in the same place where they keep the prints. So I know for a fact that anything that we showed that was lost in that fire, that Universal had already replaced the lost print with a new print struck from the original negative. That was not the case with Woman on the Run, because that was not a Universal film. Johnny Stool Pigeon, Shakedown, stuff like that, those were produced at Universal, so they had the original negatives. But Woman on the Run was a Fidelity picture, so the original negative was never the property of Universal. So our restoration was done from other sources. We found an internegative in the British Film Institute, and then a fine grain positive that still existed at Universal, and that's what I was able to digitally make a copy of when it was in my possession, and that's what the soundtrack was based on. So that's how that worked. Okay. Steve also says he's heard the term transitional noir brought up in the past. Do we subscribe to this concept, or do we believe that there was film noir and then it went directly to neo-noir? And what's your impression of that? Are there such things as transitional noir?
I don't know about transitional noir. I mean, I use the term a lot, late era noir, to kind of end the stuff that was sort of after the classic period, like, is it The Third Voice? Is it the film I'm thinking of?
Right.
Which is but it's really like a noir. And then I think it went into kind of into neo-noir with things like Chinatown, because they're sort of revisionist in a way. And then I'm weird too, because my ex and I used to always argue the Australian film The Square. It drove him nuts because I always insisted it was a film noir, not a neo-noir, because to me it was like a classic film noir. It really felt like something that could have been made in the 40s. It didn't feel revisionist or updated or ironic or whatever that sometimes you get with neo-noirs.
Right. I don't think there's no right or wrong answer to this stuff. It really depends on what type of person you are and how you categorize things and how you look at things in perspective. So I totally get where you're coming from, because I'm just like that too. I no longer think of Body Heat as anything but a film noir.
Yeah.
Because it checks off so many of the boxes, just like Double Indemnity. So the only difference is where it falls on a timeline, as opposed to what it is about or what it represents. So if you look at things like you want that timeline to tell you when things were happening, then certainly there are transitional noirs. And I tend to think of the traditional Hollywood noirs as being created in the studio system. And so when you start to see the studio system ending, that's when, to me, you see transitional noirs. But you're also seeing transitional movies of all kinds, really. But because noir, more than, say, a Western, although, stuff like Monty Hellman's early movies, like The Shooting and Ride the Whirlwind and that, I think of those as transitional Westerns, because they're just changing, because they're independently made and they're shot differently, and the approach to the material is very different. So to me, a transitional noir is like Kubrick's The Killing is somewhat of a transitional noir, or The Burglar by Paul Wenkos. And certainly Blast of Silence, to me, Alan Barron's film, is a completely transitional noir, because whenever I introduce it, I say it's very hard to tell whether this movie is the end of an era or the beginning of an era, because it falls like right in that interesting spot. Like Odds Against Tomorrow is sort of the same, right? Made by a veteran Hollywood filmmaker, Robert Ryan and Ed Begley, and they're veteran Hollywood actors. You know, William McGivern had written all these other noirs previously, but the film is very unlike a Hollywood noir because it's shot on location in New York. Everything about it feels like an independently made film, because it really was, because Harry Belafonte produced it outside the studio system. So I do think there are a lot of films that I would call transitional noirs, but that's if you're thinking of it in terms of the timeline as opposed to the elements that comprise the film itself. That's my take on that.
And this next one is from Alan. When I was a young boy in the 50s, my father would have me stay up late with him to watch movies with lessons as for a young man. Two of those movies left an indelible impression on me: The Public Enemy and Angels with Dirty Faces. Spoiler alert for the audience. My father insisted that the end of Angels showed that Rocky Sullivan actually became a coward. My interpretation was that he was doing what his friend Father Connolly implored him to do. What do you say?
Do you have a take on this, Anne? Because I sure do.
Yeah, he was pretending.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think that was kind of the moral of the story, was that he was redeeming himself. He couldn't escape the death house, but he was redeeming himself at the end by pretending to be a coward, so that the kids who idolized him would lose all respect for him and not want to be like him. So to me, that was absolutely, I don't even think there's a question about it. But if people see what they want to see, then what are you going to do? You know, see, these criminals are actually cowards at heart. It's like, not really. It does take a certain amount of guts to become a criminal. I'm not saying that's an admirable thing, but if you're talking about just, was the guy courageous or not, that's, there's a fine line between courageous and stupid, I mean, that's so yeah, we won't go there, but I'm very much hoping at the TCM festival coming up, I'm hoping that we both get a chance to see the restored version of Angels with Dirty Faces, because that has been a long time coming, and so it's kind of a big deal that they're presenting this world premiere of that restoration. That'll be pretty fun. Okay. How do you differentiate between what classifies as a noir or a gangster film? Well, right on, good timing with that question. For instance, many people consider White Heat to be film noir, yet they do not categorize The Roaring Twenties or Angels with Dirty Faces or Public Enemy as noir. And this is Andrew from Clayton, North Carolina, asking this question. So I want to hear your take on this, Anne, although I feel this question falls right in line with what we were just talking about in terms of the timeline versus the content aspect of the films.
Yeah, because I think definitely once you start, White Heat was sort of, a line in the sand where you really see something that has gangsters in it, but is really a film noir, where the psychology of the character and is really pushed to the forefront. I have to say again, I mean, James Cagney is so amazing in that film, because he's just really psychopathic in it, in a way that his gangster roles in the 30s weren't.
He's kind of lost his boyish charm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's not like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, it's like, you're just crazy. And I still do not understand why anybody would cheat on him. Not because he was a great guy, but like a fear of the consequences. It was Steve Cochran.
Yeah, I know. There is a certain, shall we say, allure that Steve Cochran possesses. Yeah. But I'm sure there are women who, well, I know for a fact that there are plenty of women who would trade you a Jimmy Cagney for a Steve Cochran.
Yeah, so exactly.
But my take on this question is, just like I always refer to film noir as an artistic movement. And those gangster pictures that Andrew is citing, the Roaring Twenties and Angels with Dirty Faces and the Public Enemy, those are all part of an earlier movement, right? And most of that movement was at Warner Brothers in the 1930s. And it was a direct response to the rise of criminal outlaw behavior, let's say, during the Depression, right? And America's love-hate relationship with the gangsters that proliferated. And I should say, I mean, I split hairs on this between outlaws and gangsters, because to me, gangsters are people who form an organization to run an organized form of crime. Outlaws are different. They are just outlaws who operate outside the law. So I don't see White Heat at all as a gangster film. I see it as an outlaw film, because Cody is not setting up any kind of a operation. He doesn't want to be legitimate. He's perfectly happy being a crook who just robs trains and banks and things, and that's it. That's a different thing than a guy who's trying to work his way in from being a crook to being a quote unquote legitimate businessman, which you really see that becomes a very, very common theme in film noir. So I think that a lot of those 30s movies, even though there's crime in them and a lot of them look like early prototypes of film noir, those are really gangster movies if they're trying to form a racket, if it's like based on Capone or something. Because Capone was a gangster as opposed to Dillinger, who was an outlaw.
Yeah.
Right. So, to some people, this is putting too fine a point on it. But, if you're this deep into crime movies, you better make these distinctions. And so that's why I think people do that, because White Heat falls firmly at the crest of the noir movement in Hollywood. So people are eager to like lump it in with the film noir movement. And I have done that myself and justified it by saying you can really see the crime film making a change here, where and it was, as I say in Dark City, it was conservatives in Hollywood wanted to see that change because they were a little upset that so much of noir focused on on normal people falling into a life of crime. That became a big part of what noir was all about. So they wanted to make a film where it shows criminal behavior as aberrant psychology, that he was crazy. He was, had this bizarre relationship with his mother, that's why he did what he did. So all of that there's certain elements of noir to which the plot of White Heat adheres, but it twists it a little bit into psychopathy, which you really saw more and more of in the 1950s. That became more common. Whereas the movies from like 1944 to 50, there were less psychopaths in the lead roles. And I think that became a bit unsettling to some of the powers that be in Hollywood.
Yeah, I think too that outlaw versus gangster thing, I think too, in a lot of ways, the outlaws also kind of mesh a little bit with the mythology of the West too. I mean, there's a lot of times those films tend to actually usually have like a rural segment where they're on the road or they're hiding out, and it's always sort of in the countryside. But also that idea of just sort of being outside of civilization, as opposed to where the gangsters films, like where you said, is organized crime. It's sort of imitating business.
I totally get that. You can easily take some plots from noir films and say, I could see this completely set in the Old West. Like you take a picture like They Live by Night.
Yeah.
The Nick Ray movie, it might as well be a Western, really. I mean, I could see them escaping on horses, robbing a stagecoach and fleeing on horses. You wouldn't have to change the plot at all. right? Guy breaks out of a jail. He falls in with this gang. The gang, they're a bunch of robbers. It's like a Jesse James. I mean, Farley Granger in that movie is sort of like, a very naive Billy the Kid or something. And I think that was the intention of the original of Edward Anderson when he wrote that novel. It was sort of like he was seeing it as a modern day Western.
Are you ready for the next question?
You bet.
Okay. Sure. In Ginny L'Amour, did Louis Jouvet end up with the blonde in the end? My tape ran out right at the tail end when the Jouvet said, "I have someone waiting for me."
That's
I couldn't
classic.
resist this question.
that is classic. This is from Kathy. Okay, Kathy, you didn't just miss the end. I think you missed a little subtext in the movie as well. I don't think any of the men. I don't think any of the men in that movie were ending up with the blonde.
With the blonde,
at the end of the film, because she just wanted to end up with Jenny. Yeah. So that's all there was to that. No, the person waiting for him at the end is his adopted son, who you see several times during the movie, and is a beautiful bit of screenwriting that I think just elevates that film to a whole other level. That he has this son of a different color. He appears to be a young Muslim kid, perhaps, living in Paris. And I mean, it was just fascinating, and the relationship between the two of them is so wonderful. And yes, it's very sweet at the end when he says, "I have someone waiting for me," and then they throw the snowball at him, and it's that is honestly one of the best upbeat endings to a crime film that I've ever seen. I really, really like that movie a lot. I was overjoyed, and when I showed that on TCM, the reaction of people on social media, it was like an avalanche as to how people loved that movie. Loved that movie. Many people saying that's the best thing you've ever shown on Noir Alley. And it makes me feel sorry for the people who won't try, with the subtitled films, or it's not noir if it's in French or whatever. It's like, really, there's an oxymoronic statement if I ever heard one. But yeah, great movie. So I'm sorry that you missed the end of that, Kathy, but I'm glad you saw what you saw of it. Okay, and here's one for you, Ann. Phil from Boston says, why do contemporary film credits go on and on? He only did it twice, but I could add and on and on and on. While 40s films only seem to run about a dozen or so names or even less. Is this due to union regulations, or are there just many more people involved in making movies these days? That is Phil from Boston who wants to know the answer to that. I have a feeling we've gotten this question before. I think remember.
It's come up before. It's been a while, so I thought, we'll talk about it again.
It's interesting. Well, I mean, I happen to know. I mean, the obvious reason for this is that most of the movies made in the 40s were made at big studios where they didn't feel the necessity to put everybody's name on the film, because everybody worked for the studio and they were all getting paid a salary. So it was just understood that you're just working here, right? So unless you were the head of a department, or you were specifically entitled to a credit because of some regulation that had been written, you weren't going to get your name on the film if you were the gaffer or the best boy or the caterer or something like that. But, once films became largely independently made and financed, then part of everything is getting the credit.
Yeah.
You have to get a credit, right? And that's why these things go on forever, because it's like written in the contract that you'll get a credit. It won't appear, and it'll appear in the first third of the, of the crawl at the end or something. I mean, generally, in the old films, everybody who had a position at the studio who was entitled to receive a credit would get it up front. And then at the end of the film, you only saw a cast list.
Yeah.
There were never credits. It was just like, and it was usually just one single title card that listed like the first 12 people or fewer that were in the movie, right? So I always tell people when you're watching these old films and the credit shows at the end, start reading them from the bottom up, because you know who played the first 5 people in the movie. So ignore those and start reading from the bottom up if you want to see who played who in the movie. But you know, God bless IMDb for listing all of these things, because you'd never know who some of the really, really small bit players are in these films, because they were never credited on screen. Sometimes like actors who appeared in more movies than anybody else in the world, like Charles Lane or Bess Flowers or Mabel Page. I mean, it was really rare for them to get an on-screen credit, yet they were probably in more movies per year than any other actor in Hollywood. So anyway, that's it. Yeah, there are a lot of union rules, I'm sure, to it as well. But these days, it's also funny because we're going back to the old days, even though we're streaming, because if you watch things streaming, the streaming services cut the credits off.
Yeah.
To start showing you ads for other things that you should watch.
Yeah.
So it's funny how I used to complain all the time about how long the credits were on the movies. And then I want to see a credit and you can't.
Yeah.
Because they cut to the next thing that you need to watch. Anyway, that's my take on that.
Okay.
Are you taking calls now during the thing? I heard the phone ring.
Sorry, I forgot.
No. I thought maybe this has become like a telethon.
No, not at all. It's so funny because like the first time it happened, I was like, and I literally don't know where my phone is. I usually mute it, but I was waiting for it because we've been texting right before we started to record. I didn't mute it. My apologies, everyone.
No. That's all right. It was funny. I just all of a sudden imagined like this was a telethon.
Well, if people want to donate, they should donate it to us. You can go to filmnoirfoundation.org. And we really do fund the restorations of these films. You know, we have a nonprofit. We have a tax status, which, by the way, is a good way to check out if people are really restoring a film or not, is you can always look up a nonprofit because there's a lot of information that they have to publish.
We are a certified 501c3, public benefit corporation in the eyes of the United States government. So that's a good thing. And it is worth, as you say, checking that out on some of these people who claim to be raising money for restorations. Extremely doubtful. Okay.
So is it my turn to read the question?
Yeah, it's your turn. Yes, it's your turn.
Okay. So I'd love and appreciate both you and Ann talking about the major / many types of women in film noir. What would you name as the major categories of women in film noir? This is like such a huge topic.
I mean, really, I don't even know where to start with this, except to say that, I mean, obviously, the femme fatale is what everybody equates with film noir, but there are the professional women. There are the women that I call the right women, right? Those are the ones that the guys should be falling in love with instead of the femme fatale. But there's just so many of these. And quite honestly, the best characters are the ones that don't fit into any easy category. I just refuse to subscribe to the good girl, bad girl thing. And when people do that, talking about these movies, I just think like, yeah, that's sort of easy, but I think you're giving short shrift to like the characterizations or the intention of the writers or directors or something when it's simplified that much, I mean, even something like Raw Deal, where you have the good girl and the bad girl, right? Played by Marsha Hunt and Claire Trevor. It's just not that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I
Right?
wrote a whole article on that film, which was primarily focused on the two women and the relationship that they each have with this man. Of course, the great thing about that film is that it's actually the good girl who's sort of leading him to his doom, and the bad girl is sort of the one who's, and she also narrates the story too. I mean, which is
Right.
interesting as well. I mean, you could argue that she's the protagonist of the film, really,
Yes.
because you're really seeing that love triangle from her point of view and what it's how it's affecting her.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that was a great article. And I totally agreed with your assessment and have stolen several things from that article over the years in my discussions of the film. Okay, so, but there's more to this question, right?
Yeah. So, what actors stand out in each category as excellent examples of that type archetype? Which films do you recommend seeing these examples best expressed, and which actress could play many of these types as well? I mean, I would say I think Joan Crawford was the most sort of the one who played the most different types in film noir. I mean, she's, I think, really an interesting actress in film noir because she also tended to be the protagonist of those films. I mean, for one thing, she's always sort of the central character. But, like, in Mildred Pierce, though, I mean, that's a really classic noir, except the femme fatale is her daughter, and she's the person who's in love with the femme fatale and whose life is being destroyed by her. So that was really quite unusual. And then you have her kind of playing the gangster type role, where she starts out poor and then she goes to Chicago and becomes a model. It's the one with Steve Cochran and
the Damned Don't
Cry. And then there's the other one where she's like the leader of a small gang, and she has to go in for eye surgery.
Oh yeah, this woman is dangerous. Yeah.
So she's playing the
goofy movie, a very goofy movie that I actually am very fond of.
Yeah,
as kind of idiotic as the plot is in that movie. Yeah. Joan can't be bad on screen. She's always so much fun to watch. And yeah, that film is nuts.
But essentially, she's like the gangster who's being redeemed by the love of the good girl, in this case, man, the doctor, too. I mean, so
yes,
she was constantly sort of playing on that. And I think, too, another one that we didn't talk about was the sort of sidekick character that Eve Arden did in so many films. And I'm going to plug Unfaithful again, because, I love that movie.
Right.
But just her relationship with her cousin, who's actually the protagonist, that played by Zachary Scott, and just when she gives them the "Why You Suck" speech.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, and these are just really good characters. I don't know how much gender politics you need to apply to it, but there are women who made a lot of film noir who, for some reason, I find that people who early on in their noir watching careers, shall we say, it's people very commonly misapply the femme fatale label.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so because it's a film noir, they say, so she's the femme fatale. And I'm thinking of movies like Gilda, where I think of Rita Hayworth as a very sexually alluring woman in that film, but she's not the femme fatale, because she is not really using these men to try to get something from them.
No,
she's
not a femme fatale.
That would be Glenn Ford, or a character like what Claire Trevor plays in Murder My Sweet, or Stanwyck in Double Indemnity. Those are classic femme fatale characters. But when you see Anne Sheridan never really played a femme fatale. She played really beautiful women who have to deal with the attention of men. Mm-hmm. And that becomes, so something like Nora Prentice or The Unfaithful or even Woman on the Run, Anne Sheridan was not that character. She was just a very independent woman. Ella Raines, one of my favorites, never played a femme fatale in any of her movies. She was just a very self-possessed young woman in all of her films, right? And Phantom Lady and The Web and, Impact. She's a garage mechanic, for God's sakes, in Impact. And Ida Lupino never really played a femme fatale, right? She could play a villainess, which she did several times, but she rarely played the femme fatale, which is not really the role she plays in Roadhouse, even though everything is kind of set up for that to be a femme fatale-ish role. She defies expectation at every turn in that movie, and she's not acting out of avarice or greed or anything. She's purely acting out of self-preservation, which is the same thing with Rita Hayworth in Gilda, as opposed to Rita Hayworth in Lady from Shanghai, where she is a very deceitful, devious, manipulative character. She isn't that way in Gilda. So I think a lot of these, the way people think about this stuff, people sometimes need to think just a little bit more about it.
Yeah, and I think too, I just wanted to talk briefly about Pitfall, because one of the things I really love about Pitfall is how even in the marketing materials and within the film, Elizabeth Scott is sort of set up like she's going to be the femme fatale, but she's not. I mean, instead, it's like one horrible man after another, and she's trying to survive. I mean, even in a way beyond the way that Lupino was taking care of herself and was very self-sufficient. But with Elizabeth Scott, I mean, she was just really screwed, basically. And the guy that seemed like the nice guy was just as bad to her as everybody else. It just looked a little different.
Yeah, he just wasn't a sociopath like the two other guys that she was involved with.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make him the hero.
Yeah, exactly.
and he doesn't behave very heroically, or and still, even after I showed that recently, I'm kind of amazed to read comments on social media where people are saying she was such a great femme fatale in this movie. And I'm like, but she wasn't. I mean, and that movie is kind of a tragedy because she does everything. She's the only person in the movie who behaves with integrity throughout the film. The minute she learns that this guy is a married man, she calls it off. And she tells him, I'm going to give you a break, right? But then the mistake she makes is calling him for help when the true psychopath comes after her. She asks for help. But what else is she going to do? Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you, if that film were remade today, it would be remade from her point of view.
Yeah.
As it should be, because, the first couple of times you watch that movie, you empathize with Dick Powell. The next time you watch it, it's like, he's kind of an idiot, and she's the noir character. She's really getting screwed over in this film. Very, very much, I have the same attitude about a lot of films, honestly, but I feel the same way about the movie No Way Out, where it's, you get Richard Widmark and Sidney Poitier are clearly the big stars of the movie, and that racial thing between them is what drives it all. But the noir character in that movie is Linda Darnell. I mean, and the fact that she has to figure out how to survive when she ends up hating all the people around her. Yeah. And she's stuck with these people, and she wants to grow out of it, but she's trapped. She's the trapped one in the story. And you see this a lot in films, even something like Vertigo, where if you just look at the film sideways as Madeline's story or Judy's story instead of Scotty's story, it's like, who's the real noir character in this film? It's this woman getting used, twice in that film, right? By Gavin Elster and then by Scotty himself, who turns out to be not much better than Gavin Elster in the way he treats this woman. So anyway,
and he treats his female friend very badly too. I mean, when I saw Vertigo, I despised his character, which is one of the reasons why people are always like, oh, are you going to go see Vertigo? It's playing again. I'm like, no.
So you despised Scotty. You despised
Oh yeah,
Scotty's character. Yeah.
from the just. I mean, I didn't like the way he treated his friend, especially offhand way he made that comment about how they had been engaged once, like it was just
Yeah.
like nothing. And I'm just going, okay, I already don't like you. But then that scene, like when she's begging him,
Yeah.
not to dye her hair, I was just like, I wanted to kill him at that point. It
Yeah.
was just so.
And it's a really good question. I didn't see a person attached to this, a name attached to this. It's a good question. It's more than we can possibly cope with,
Yeah.
in the time we have here. But it is to me, one of the central quandaries, if you will, in film noir is the way these movies were sold by the studios make you think they're about one thing, but then when you watch them, you see that the writers were actually intending something entirely different. So when you watch a movie like Human Desire, it's clear that the studio and the producers were saying, just blame it all on the woman.
Yeah.
And that's how they would handle it in the marketing. But it's clear when you watch the movie that is not where the filmmakers are coming from. They're treating the female character like the most noir character, right? And I mean, she's the one who's trapped with this brute for a husband. And the Glenn Ford character is kind of like, oh, I can go with her, or I can go with this other babe who wants me. Whatever, he gets to do whatever the hell he wants to do. He's not the trapped character in the story, right? So yeah, this is worth really taking a good look at in a lot of these films and second guessing a lot of the conventional wisdom about these movies and about the role women play in these movies. Because I think there are a lot fewer femme fatales in noir than people think. And like Midge from Vertigo, the character you're talking about, is one of those women I was referring to as the quote unquote right woman. It's like the tragedy of this guy's life would be avoided if he just treated Midge with more respect and just said, she's great. She's a very forthright, bright, creative, talented, self-reliant person. What's wrong with her? Well, the answer is she's not Kim Novak.
Yeah.
That's it. So,
well, but I think also, and she's also, I mean, what you said about her being self-sufficient, I think is probably a turnoff for Scotty, because she doesn't need him.
Well, Anne, yeah. you have hit on like a major theme in these films is the guys thinking that have the savior complex, that think their role is to save the woman. And like, well, what if the woman doesn't actually need that saving, And when you look at actresses like, well, Joan Crawford might be a bad example because her characters generally caved by the end of the movie. And they finally were like, I've learned to accept the love of the good man. And now, and she caved in a lot of these movies where Stanwyck did not, Ida Lupino did not, Ann Sheridan did not, Ella Raines did not. That was because they didn't have this persona that and Crawford, more than any of those women, Crawford was responsible for her movies.
Yeah.
Like, and how they would turn out in the end. So she was choosing to present that persona to the American public because she felt she wanted to be loved more than those other actresses, I feel. And so she always like ended up, going with the guy at the end. Like I could never see Crawford make a movie where it ends like The Man I Love, where Lupino just walks away at the end. And she's like, I'm saying goodbye to the love of my life, but damn it, I'm going to keep going. And, she was very resilient.
Yeah.
And that's something you don't generally see in Crawford, So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm sorry
Moving
that I
along.
didn't write down the name of the person who asked that question.
We
I feel
appreciate the
terrible.
question. Whoever wrote that, we appreciate the question.
Huh.
Okay. Sandy in Berkeley wants to know if either of us have seen the Mexican noir film El by Luis Buñuel. And also, speaking of Mexico, TCM recently showed Deep Crimson, Arturo Ripstein's remake of The Honeymoon Killers. Sandy would like our thoughts about him, not only as a not only noir director, still working. So, okay, yes, I have seen Elle by Luis Buñuel, and it's a great film. And who knows, that we'll see if that ends up on Noir Alley or something one of these days. Although I have to say that Buñuel to me is sort of like like Hitchcock, in that he's almost his own genre.
Yeah.
He doesn't really make films the way other people do, so it's very, very hard to include his movies in some kind of genre. But Criminal Life of Archibaldo de la Cruz and Elle and these things, there are noirish elements to Buñuel's films, certainly, and the Mexican films especially.
Yeah. I was just to say, just about Buñuel is, I think my favorite film of his is actually his version of Wuthering Heights,
which I don't think I've seen.
Oh God, it's incredible! It's my favorite version of the novel.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is. But I'm thinking, but in a way, it is noirish because that story is noirish, where you've got because of the way the characters are.
Yeah. And I know this isn't exactly where Sandy wanted us to go with this question, but I'm going to mention it anyway because I find it so interesting. There have actually been 5 versions of the Honeymoon Killers story. So one of these days, just when I freak out and I realize the end is nigh, I will program all 5 films like as a all-day festival. I don't think TCM would ever go for that, but you could do it.
You could do it as, if we go back to a 10-day festival, you could do it the final Sunday.
It's like all of it, and it's weird because you have to have a certain mindset to appreciate watching the same story 5 times, but told differently every time. And like the protagonists, in some cases, the protagonist changes. Like, who is the story actually focusing on? But the Lonely Heart Bandits was the first one, made at Republic in 1950, which is almost contemporaneous with the story that it's based on.
Yeah.
The story of Ray Fernandez and Martha Beck, the killers, the Lonely Heart Killers, right? Who advertised for lonely women in the newspapers, and then they'd kill them and steal their money. So Lonely Heart Bandits was the first one. And then I think everybody left the story alone for a long time after that, until Honeymoon Killers, which, as I'm sure many people know, was originally directed by Martin Scorsese. And then he was fired from the production for taking too long. And Leonard Castle came in and directed the rest of the film. And it's a really terrific movie. Yeah. And then I guess Arturo Ripstein made the next one, Deep Crimson, which is a really, really good movie. And then there's a version called Lonely Hearts, which was made, I can't remember when, 2000 and something. But that's the one where they completely switched the protagonists, because the guy who wrote the movie was, I think, the grandson of the cop who apprehended Fernandez and Beck. And so he made the cops the protagonists of the story, played by John Travolta and James Gandolfini. And in my estimation, it was a huge mistake in terms of the storytelling, because they're just not as interesting as following the killers, played by, if I'm not mistaken, Jared Leto and Salma Hayek.
Oh,
and
wow.
If Salma Hayek is as far from Martha Beck as you could possibly get, right?
Yeah.
And they don't put her in a fat suit or anything. I mean, she's Salma Hayek. So yeah. That's a totally different take on it. And then there's a movie called Alleluia that was even more recent, which is the goriest version of the story. And I forget what country it was from. I honestly can't remember it at this moment, but
Yeah. Well, it's gory because it showed up on Shudder, which is a streaming service
it's all
for horror films.
and it's easy to see how through those 5 movies you will note that every time it's remade, it becomes more of a horror film.
Yeah.
It becomes, the psychological aspects diminish and the horror aspects are increased. Even in the Travolta, Salma Hayek one, the murders are really, really grisly, because they killed, the victims with a hammer and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, obviously Honeymoon Killers is in black and white. So as creepy and unsettling as that movie is, I wouldn't use the term gory to describe it. But by the time they get around to Deep Crimson and then later Lonely Hearts and Hallelujah is like blood soaked. So what does that say? We require more and more sensation all the time. To me, that's what it says. Okay. Your turn.
My turn. I really love Dark Corner. Online, I read there was an alternate ending written, though it didn't say it was filmed. Do you know how things played out in this alternate ending? And secondly, I'm very impressed by the lighting work, but no LD is listed as a DVD, and IMDb doesn't list one either. Does this mean the lighting was set up by the cameraman, Joseph McDonald or Tal Gabini, listed as a second cameraman, electrical department, or just that LD went uncredited? That's Red from St. Louis.
Okay, I don't know about an alternate ending to the Dark Corner, so I'm sorry I can't answer that part. And I'm going to naturally assume that Joe McDonald lit his own sets in that movie because he was one of the best. So I'm certain. Almost certain that's the case. And honestly, in most cases in classic Hollywood movies, I mean, it's kind of the rare occasion when the director of photography was not also completely in charge of the lighting scheme. Like John Alton, that's all John Alton. I mean, there's nobody else setting his lights. I mean, it was him.
Yeah, and I just like to tell people, if you want to hear more about John Alton and how he set lights and a lot of things, in our last episode, which is up on YouTube, you talked about that. I thought really quite a bit and really interestingly. And I will be at some point pulling that out and doing a short of it just so people can see it, because I think it's for people that are interested in John Alton. It was a remarkable answer to a question.
Oh, good. That's fun. Because he really deserves to be credited, I think, on a lot of his films, like the films he made with Anthony Mann, especially. I think he deserves almost a co-director credit.
Yeah.
In much the same way that Ben Hecht always gave Lee Garms a co-director credit on the films that they made together, because, Ben Hecht didn't know one end of a camera from the other. And Lee Garms pretty much was in charge of what the films looked like, as opposed to Hecht, which was, cared about the dialogue, he cared about the performances, the pace of the film and all that kind of stuff. But what you were actually seeing on screen, Lee Garms was totally in charge of that. And, it's always different depending on a filmmaker, whether they let the cameraman just go off and do their own thing, or whether they're really collaborative with them, or whether they don't collaborate with them at all, So Joe McDonald, though, I would assume he handled all that himself. Okay, in a somewhat related question, Bob asked, what happened in the 70s that made film quality so terrible? It seems like every TV program or movie appeared to be blurrier or grainier in its quality. And the audio sound quality also seemed to suffer. Clarity and poor sound level consistently is almost always difficult, is the word he chooses. Anne, any thoughts on this?
No, I have no thoughts on it. I'm sorry. I do have a thought which is kind of an interesting just thing talking about this really quickly is John Carpenter had a really, really small budget on Halloween, and a huge, it was like $300,000. And a huge hunk of that he did was spent on the camera equipment, because he wanted the best camera equipment he could get. And he had the film processed at the MGM laboratory, because that was the best film processing laboratory. And it's so interesting to see how that film, and also Dean Cundey shot the film, which also helps. But when you look at other low budget independent films from that same time period, the prints now look really terrible. Like, it's really interesting to see the difference, because like I said, he made that a priority, and it was a good payoff.
Well, I mean, the reason for this is because of the changes in film stock. I mean, that's entirely the reason that the look changes. And movies shot in Hollywood, especially movies shot in black and white in Hollywood, they would the art there was to know what the end result would be, because it was going to be very different from what you actually saw on the set, right? So there was way more light involved to get a higher resolution image. I know resolution isn't what they called it back then, right? You wanted to avoid the grain that would appear in films, which generally appears under lower light conditions. So you had, right, you'd flood the set with light and then stop the aperture down to give you a much sharper focus and a much crisper image. And then the genius noir cinematographers knew how to do that and get that sharpness and everything, while they were still using a lot of black, and the blacks were genuinely black as opposed to, fading out into gray or something. And black and white films age much better than color films, because there's no dyes or anything in there that are going to fade over time, which is why when you see a color film from the 50s, if it hasn't been properly restored, all the blue and all the yellow is going to leach out of the film, and it'll just end up being red. That's the only thing that's left. So it was old. Once they got off sound stages and started shooting films in the streets and on location, it became imperative to have faster and faster film stocks so that you could shoot under lower light conditions. So what you're seeing today with digital photography is what they wanted all along, is to be able to shoot in absolute minimal lighting conditions and still get a sharp image. This is like the payoff. After all these decades and decades, digital is now paying that off, because it allows you to shoot with minimal camera setups. I mean, honestly, I will say, I'm probably going to get mail on this, but like, if Stanley Kubrick made Barry Lyndon today, I have to assume he would shoot it digitally.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to shoot the whole thing by candlelight.
Yeah.
And the incredible headaches that they went through to achieve that with 35 millimeter film, today he could probably actually shoot that movie by candlelight.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one thing is better than the other. It's just the technology changes, and if Bob here wants to know why the film quality was so different, that's why. And interestingly, I think a lot of films in the 70s used that to their advantage, right? I mean, if you look at, like, Owen Roizman was a cinematographer who used that 70s style and the film stock and the graininess. I mean, when he shot The French Connection, that was like a revelation. That's a beautifully, beautifully photographed movie, because he's using the grain as part of the emotional impact of the movie, because it looks so dirty. New York looks so grimy and so dirty because he's enhancing it through the use of that film stock. Now, I've seen that film restored, and honestly, I'm not sure that visually there was a point to restoring it. The audio is fantastic when it's restored, because you can hear Don Ellis's score completely, and it's distinct from all the sound effects in the movie. And when I saw it restored a few years ago, it was the revelation was the soundtrack, not the visual impact of the movie, which I recalled as being very, very similar to what I saw in the 70s. But man, Don Ellis's score was just sensational. Once they had achieved this better level of sound mixing and equalizing and everything, really enhanced the movie. So anyway, that's the deal. But some of those 70s movies like Serpico and stuff like that, to me, that look says the 70s. Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. These are a certain look to the films that I think isn't bad. I think they're working with what they had and getting an effect that they were definitely after.
Well, and I think
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, and the remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like I really love the look of that film.
Yep. Me too.
It just is, and it is kind of grainy, but it really suits the story, and it's just, I don't know. Do you know who shot that? I don't.
I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember right now. I probably know him, and that's going to make it doubly embarrassing. I also want to just cite another cinematographer from the 70s who is very different from what we're describing right now, but had a very specific look, was Gordon Willis, who shot the Godfather movies and the Parallax View and Clute and stuff like this. And Gordon Willis was like the John Alton of the 1970s, because he would really use dense black areas on the screen and get this pure black that was not common for the time. And I just think his cinematography on The Godfather is extraordinary for being that's a color movie. But you can see in his camera setups and the way he approaches shooting these scenes that he has a complete understanding of the way movies were made in the 1940s and the classic Hollywood look, which he replicates quite often in The Godfather, but he does it with color. And there's this burnished glow to the film, even though it also has this starkness that makes me think sometimes that this could have worked as a black and white film.
Yeah, which is funny you said that, because it didn't make it into this set of questions, but someone actually asked that, like, what do you think if like, should The Godfather have been shot in black and white, or what would it have been like if it had been shot in black and white? So we might as well answer that. Since we're on the topic.
I don't think it should have been shot in black and white, because I do believe that I think Coppola's intentions with that film, I think he used the color quite brilliantly to enhance the old world sections, particularly, would not have been nearly as powerful. And the way he visualized Little Italy as a very, very colorful place, I thought all that was very smart.
Yeah.
And he clearly learned his lessons from classic cinema, but I don't necessarily think that everything is better in black and white. Certain stories, yes. Like, I see no need, like, for a Double Indemnity or something like that to be in color. Like, why? We love the black and white cinematography Out of the Past. We love it, But honestly, The Godfather, no, that's a color movie. That's definitely a color movie.
Yeah, and I think there were some period color noirs that were great as in color, like Leave Her to Heaven, because so much of that whole shooting in New Mexico part, and even, when they go back home and all that, the color is such a key part of that film that I couldn't imagine. Like, it's definitely a film noir. It's just a color film noir.
And to me, the color in Leave Her to Heaven is hallucinatory.
Yeah.
So that this isn't color like you naturally experience color in real life. I mean, they're using the color as an element of the craziness of the movie. I mean, it's just so vivid. I mean, Gene Tierney's face in color why would you not shoot her in color? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, those green eyes and the red lips, my God, it's extraordinary. So anyway, making the best out of what you have to work with is the essential thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we love the film noir movement because most movies were in black and white. They maximized the value of black and white in those films. You know, and that's all. I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Okay, your turn.
Do you see noir elements in the Joker 2019? Granted, it's basically a comic book based film as are in vogue today, but it certainly has a dark tone.
I saw noir elements in. First off, I have to say I was very surprised because Kathleen, my wife, does not watch superhero movies or anything, but for some reason she watched Joker.
Yeah.
And is the one who convinced me to watch it because she thought it was really good, and I enjoyed the movie, but I thought it was noir in the sense that Taxi Driver and King of Comedy are noir, because that movie borrows so liberally from those two films, especially King of Comedy, that it's like, wow. This is, you know, so it's just funny to me. I'll just say this out of the blue because it, you know, I am bemused by this whole thing that goes on today where it's Martin Scorsese versus the comic book world.
Yeah.
Because he has made these comments about how that's not really cinema. I wonder how many people who love Joker are aware of how much Joker owes to Martin Scorsese.
Yeah.
Because so much of that film is completely stolen from his stuff. I mean, no offense to Todd Phillips. If you're going to steal from the best. But he stole huge chunks of that film from Scorsese.
Yeah.
And they were very lucky to have Joaquin Phoenix give a really compelling performance in that film. And I think it's interesting because it is also of its time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not dismissive of the movie in any way, because I think it probably in 20 years or something, people will look back on 2019 and say, what movies kind of spoke to the climate of the times? And unfortunately, I think Joker is one of them. You know, it's like an incel movie. It's like incel run amok, you know, and it was good. It's a good film.
Yeah, I liked it quite a bit. And I've thought that Joaquin Phoenix's performance was really good. I thought what it was saying about needing mental health services, not being able to get them, which is still a problem now, was actually an aspect of the film I liked. I thought the mental health issues were handled much better than I usually see in films today. So I liked that aspect of it as well. But for me, that film was really his performance. Like, that was the thing that really drew me in, was that characterization. And I thought the woman that played his mother was really excellent also.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a great performance.
And I thought it was so interesting, and then we'll move on, that they actually got Robert De Niro to play the talk show host.
No, but to play the talk show host.
And it's just like, when he read the script, he must have thought, wow, what goes around comes around, you know?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, clearly the Joker was Rupert Pupkin. And, you know, anyway, very strange film, but good.
Yeah.
Okay, I think is it me now?
It's you now.
Okay, John in Laytonsville, Maryland, says, seeing Harper again inspired me to revisit Ross MacDonald. So I grabbed my old omnibus edition and read most of his notable novels. And he says, I often read that MacDonald is considered heir to Hammett and Chandler, yet his works don't seem to get the same buzz or acclaim as those two. I also think his novels, while entertaining, don't quite measure up. Maybe it's just me. What do you think? Have you read MacDonald's stuff?
No, I have not.
Okay. I will say this, John. It's now, 20 years into the new century. And I don't know how old you are, John, but I can tell you that Ross MacDonald sold way more books than Hammett and Chandler. Probably sold more books than those two guys combined. Because he was, I might be mistaken. Somebody who watches this will correct me. But I honestly believe that Ross MacDonald was the first writer of crime fiction to really be taken seriously in this country as a mainstream novelist. His books were like reviewed on the front page of the New York Times Review of Books. People saw that he was writing one big overarching narrative about, what would you say it's about? Well, it's about the sins of the fathers and Paradise Lost. That's as quickly as I can say it, right? Because they're all set in California. And his depiction of California is, he has one huge advantage over the other guys. Number one, Hammett never wrote anything after the early 1930s, right? That was it. And Chandler was, for all intents and purposes, was done in like 1951. That was it. A Long Goodbye was really the end of the road for him. MacDonald started as John Ross MacDonald in the late 40s, clearly copying Chandler, but he wrote through the 40s, through the 50s, the 60s, into the 70s. And you definitely, reading all of his books, you get an overarching view of California and changing lifestyles and things that you don't get in any of the other writers. That's why if somebody said to me, Ross MacDonald was the quintessential California crime novelist, you're not going to get an argument from me on that. And it was just, he was always really good about pulling in contemporary issues, like when he wrote The Underground Man, and it was all about the wildfires that would ravage Southern California. He was the only one that was doing something like that at the time, right? Taking what were very topical issues for the state and making them part of his narrative. But of course, the narrative always ended up being about buried family secrets. What a surprise in crime fiction. But he really understood that whole thing about a generation that gets lost, that like the children of these wealthy people always having major issues and being runaways and all that. That's what all of MacDonald's books were about. Kenneth Miller, by the way, his actual name. And he was married to Margaret Miller, who was also a really good crime fiction writer as well. And he was a Canadian by birth, not a Californian. But I just love his stuff. I'm very overdue for a rereading of a lot of MacDonald's stuff. I was very confused because for years there was talk that the Coen brothers were going to make I think it was Blood Money, into a film. And it was like I heard it was in pre-production, but it just disappeared. So I don't know what happened, whether COVID got in the way or whether the brothers decided, because now that we know they're making movies individually and not as a team anymore, that may have had something to do with it. I'm not sure. But if you haven't read MacDonald, The Far Side of the Dollar, The Chill, The Galton Case, The Underground Man, from the mid 50s to the mid 60s, I would say is his best period. Early 50s and late 40s, he's clearly doing Raymond Chandler. Then in the mid 50s, he finds his own singular thing. And those books are all just tremendous.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are on Robert B. Parker's mystery novels and the various adaptations of his work.
Do you know his stuff? Spencer
Nope.
for Hire.
I mean, I'm aware of it, but I haven't really read his
Yeah,
stuff.
well, okay. At the risk of pissing off a lot of people, I never liked Robert Parker's stuff. I and it's hard to explain exactly why. Maybe it's because I'm a Californian and his books were set on the East Coast. Um, I don't know, but I do know. In fact, I do know why. Because when I started reading this stuff, I was a Chandler fanatic, and I never found Robert Parker's style, his prose style, to be all that interesting. Um, you know, his plots were good. I wasn't a huge fan of the character of the Spencer character. He seemed like a lot of wish fulfillment in the detective who's just like an expert at this and that, and it seemed a little bit like a pastiche kind of thing. And I wasn't crazy about his writing style. A lot of you know how a lot of hard-boiled fiction, the parody of it is, I saw her standing there in the corner. I walked over and said hello. She looked at me like that. I turned and said this. That's like Parker. That's the way Parker writes. I mean, virtually 2/3 of the sentences start with I, followed by the verb, followed by whatever else happens. And I just like writing that's a little more inventive and creative than that. Oh boy, I've just ticked off because I know some of my friends who actually started writing the books after, like Ace Atkins, who's a buddy of mine, started writing the books after Parker died. So, sorry, Ace, I haven't actually read one. You maybe were a better prose stylist, but anyway, that's my take on that. Okay, so Anne, is there Alan from San Anselmo, California wants to know, is there a particular movie critic you like to read? Do you have a particular critic that you like to read?
I don't read any critics.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm interested in a film, I want to know more about it, then like sometimes for some stuff, like it's fun to go and see people's commentary. Like when the new Candyman film came out, I really wanted to listen to what African American horror fans thought about it, because that was the perspective I really wanted. So I found a bunch of different people, and it was really interesting to hear from that, because that first film was really important to African American horror audiences, and this one was quite different in tone. It was produced and directed by and written by African Americans. So I was really curious to see like how they reacted to the film. And so that's kind of the cool thing, is you can kind of get different perspectives. And like, so when I'm interested in something and following up in it, then I have some women. And the kind of interesting thing is these people are kind of from all over the world. And that's kind of interesting too. Like there's people from the UK, people from the South here. So that's really interesting too. So I feel like I get a lot more by doing that, because I feel like I'm getting like a lot of different perspectives, and not necessarily the perspective of someone who just, especially with horror, because there's so much snobbery around it that it's kind of useless sometimes to go by standard reviewers.
Yeah, I also think we're living in a very different time, because when I was a kid, I remember, newspapers and magazines had more, they were more popular, right? They had more cachet. So I read all of those critics, and it mattered when a studio they would give a movie a good review, like a Pauline Kael or a Vincent Canby. There are literally dozens and dozens more. But because newspapers have taken such a hit in recent years, it's all moved to the internet. And then once it was moved to the internet, it was like a free for all. And then all of a sudden, everybody was a critic, and there was no single person that you went to hear their views. I know there's a lot of good film writing that I mostly get on the internet, right? Now, having said that, I will say my absolute favorite writer on film is in our bullpen
Yeah.
is Imogen
Is
Sarah
Imogen,
Smith.
yeah.
Imogen to
Yeah.
me is the best writer on film that there is.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel we're very fortunate that she writes for the Noir City magazine. And she also writes a ton of stuff for Criterion, and she writes her own books and everything. But I find that that's where you're going to find some of the best film writing now is the stuff that's an adjunct to the streaming services. Like there's a lot of really good stuff on
Yeah.
Criterion. You know, so when you go and stream the movie, they also give you an assortment of stuff you can actually read.
Yeah.
And I just did this was really, really fun. We were putting out through Flickr Alley, we're putting out a double bill of The Guilty and High Tide, two of our restorations on one disc coming up. And one of the special features is Imogen talking about Lee Tracy, right? Who's the star of High Tide, who was, you know, a big popular movie star in the 30s, but then kind of fell on hard times and ended up making, you know, this picture at Poverty Row. And I had the great privilege and pleasure of being Imogen's crew for that, because I'm producing this special feature, but normally where I'm the one that goes and, you know, I have the camera crew and the sound guy and everything else. I was all of that for Imogen, and she did the talking, and she's better at it than I am. I mean, she was absolutely spectacular, and she did this 27-minute off the top of her head verbal essay about the life and work of Lee Tracy that was just spectacular. And so that special feature, which ended up being cut down to like 16 minutes or something, and when that's your ratio, when you record for like 26 minutes and you get a usable 16, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. And she was just great. So I'm just very I will read every last thing that Imogen writes.
By the way, just since we're on that subject of you know, Noir City Magazine, if you're into film noir, it really is worth subscribing for the writing that not only Imogen does, but our other stable of writers. And you know, basically you donate $20 to the film or more to the Film Noir Foundation, which goes toward our restoration projects. But you also sign up on our email list, and signing up on the email list is actually free. And then that gives you our monthly newsletter, and then also announcements when Ask Eddie is coming out. So correct. You can go to filmnoirfoundation.org and just hit the contribute tab and to do both.
Well done. And I do want to stipulate so people understand, signing up for the mailing list, the newsletter you get is an email newsletter, it's not the magazine.
Correct.
You have to be a donor to the foundation to get the magazine. And also, the magazine is now in print form. Every issue is also available as an actual printed magazine. That's only available right now through Amazon, and that is separate. Your donation to the foundation does not get you a print edition of the magazine. You have to order that separately. And while it's been a great success and people love the magazine, I do want to just stipulate that, you know, we make a couple of bucks off the printed edition of the magazine, but Amazon makes most of the money. Mm-hmm. And before people decry the evil corporation that is Amazon, I do want to point out they have the wherewithal to do this.
Yeah.
Right. So it's something that they're spending their money on. That's a good thing, because all you do is click the button and like overnight that thing is printed and mailed, and the quality is sensational. So I honestly would not have agreed to do this if I had not, you know, we did a test and I said, I'm not announcing anything until we go through this and the magazine is sent to me and I feel that this is a quality publication. And it, you know, I ordered it and I had it the next day, and it was honestly a higher quality than anything I could buy off the newsstand. So I'm pleased about that. I wish we could make more money on those print issues, but I don't want to raise the price any more than it already is. So that's that.
Okay, this is me, and this is from me. I know all our favorite genre films is film noir, crime, heist, and Anne has stated her love of horror, but what is Eddie's second favorite genre? For me, it's sci-fi, horror, fantasy, epitomized by Alien, Forbidden Planet, Pitch Black, and John Carpenter's The Thing. John of Cape Cod asked, what would be your next favorite film genre, period, or style, either to restore or to introduce? Say as if, God forbid, you should tire of more.
I don't actually have one, quite honestly. I mean, for me, it's noir, and then everything else is sort of equal. Like, I like Westerns as much as I like horror films. I don't like hard science fiction as much as I like speculative fiction. So that's, stuff that looks very much like our world, but is slightly askew. I love those movies, right? Comedies, of course. But I don't like stupid comedies. I like sophisticated comedies. I mean, obviously, I love Preston Sturges and Billy Wilder, and you can't do better than The Lady Eve and Palm Beach Story, and So I like smart movies. I mean, I'll watch any kind of noir film.
Yeah.
Even if it's a B film that is kind of lame, I'll find something to enjoy about it. Other genres, they better be smart. Like just a Western that's like a B Western or something, I'm not gonna love it. But if it's a really good Western, right? Whether it's Hawks or Ford or Peckinpah or Walter Hill, or it's just got to be really smart and really well done. And I feel the same way about science fiction and horror. If I want a horror movie, I want a horror movie that's a smart horror movie. And I mean, we can argue over what that means. What constitutes a smart horror movie, as opposed to something that's just like a freak show movie.
Yeah.
I'm not into those films so much.
Yeah, and I'm pretty too. I mean, I hear you, because I know, like, for me with horror, obviously, like, I don't like torture porn. I don't like things that are that gory. Like, I haven't even watched any of the French extremism movement because I just don't want to see it. It's not the kind of stuff I like.
What's an example of French extremism?
Oh, it's like you actually talked about the director, and it's actually like
is that like High Tension?
High Tension and Irreversible and those things, like,
Gaspar Noé,
Gaspar Noé, and those kind of, and there's been a lot of other people similar to that making films, and that like holds no interest for me. Or there's like a film called Martyrs, which you'll never get me to see. I mean, I haven't even seen the original Last House on the Left.
Yeah.
Which is considered, I don't like, especially I don't like stories about women getting hurt, because it's too much like the real world.
Yes, I completely understand. I know there was a horror film recently, I don't know what it was called, about the woman who was lost out in the wilderness, and the guys come after her, and then she fights them off to survive. I forget what that was, but those are really, really hard for me to watch. They don't hold that much interest for me, to be honest. Now, Gaspar Noé's stuff I love, because he is the ultimate envelope pusher, right? And to me, he's a very, very smart director who's doing things in ways that are just not done, and in very obviously they're in questionable taste, because a lot of people are just going to check out because they're so horrifying at times. But I find the movies very compelling, very compelling. Anyway, but have you seen I didn't even try the Lars von Trier one with Matt Dillon, The House That Jack Built?
No, I won't watch any of his films. I parted ways with him like I think by, oh God, the one with the English actress where
Um,
she's like, there's something wrong with her mentally, and she gets married. They get married at the beginning, and then she basically like martyrs herself to save the town. It's just really weird.
right.
And Breaking the Waves, yeah. And I
Yeah.
despised that movie when I
Oh,
walked out
okay.
of it. I just
Okay.
walked out Breaking the Waves, and I never. It was just weird because, and it drives me nuts because of all the Danish. Of all the Danish directors, he's the one that's really famous.
He's the famous one.
He's the famous one. It's just so frustrating because there's so many good directors.
That's generally though how it works, Anne, right? The guy who's the most provocative is the one who becomes the most famous, right?
Yeah, and the thing is really like Anders Thompson Jensen is actually, his films are even wilder and very envelope pushing. I mean, like Men and Chickens, Adam's Apples, those films are like ones that I'm like, I don't typically recommend, even though I think they're really good films to people, because they're hard to watch. But they, I mean, you know, so I guess what I'm saying is I think it comes down to a worldview for me, which is I don't mind things being sort of pushing the envelope and strange and unsettling, things like that. I think my main problem with Von Trier is just that he has such a negative view of the way human beings are. And I don't think people are that bad. I mean, some people do awful things, and there's awful things that happen in war or something like Nazism. I'm not saying things don't happen like that, but there's no situation where everybody in that situation is a terrible person.
Yeah. No, I understand. And that outer edge, I always am questioning, like, have these filmmakers lost touch with normal life? Let's just say, I won't say reality or something, but normal life.
Yeah.
Where everything they're doing is really a commentary on cinema. And what will people watch and all this. And part of me is I'm a very regular person. It's like, who would spend their time watching this? Like, and for people to argue about it, like, oh, if you didn't like it, it's because X, Y, and Z. It's like, if I didn't like it, it's because I don't want to spend my time watching people get slaughtered.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. I mean, there's nothing to this. It doesn't mean I'm less of a cinephile because I don't like, and it's not like I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
No, I understand it just fine.
Yeah.
And I can't for the life of me fathom why I would want to sit there and watch something like that,
Yeah.
So anyway.
All
right. So lastly. Oh, is this me?
It's you.
Asking this? Okay. The final question is from Romana in Pasadena. Wants to know if this is that your office where you are when you join us? Are those press badges right there? Yes. Are those press badges hung up on your right shoulder from all the places you have had noir festivals? And she wants to know what's above my Venetian blinds. And can you move to a different room so we get to see something different? Okay. Well, this is a slightly different setup for me than normal. You have moved. You have moved off the couch today, Anne, because we're seeing far less Charlotte than normal.
I'm sorry about that, guys. Yes, that's because I was working on our newsletter, which you can sign up to get for free at filmnoirfoundation.org.
Well done.
And so, yeah, I was basically writing up until it was time for us to shoot. So I'm shooting from my desktop computer rather than my laptop.
Yes, and this is in fact my office, although to be real about this, I have like 3 of them because there's just so much stuff. And there's so much stuff that the odds of your seeing something different are infinitesimal because it requires so much movement and moving things around in order to do this. I mean, it may seem like nothing to flip open a laptop and do one of these calls, but there's actually like a light over here and a light over there and all this stuff and wires, and I'm wired up to a microphone, and I have an earpiece in so that the sound Anne's voice doesn't get picked up on my microphone. So it's a little more complex than people might realize. And it's difficult to set up in different places in the house because then it's just sitting there in my wife's way or in Tizzy's way or something, So I tend to find a spot and settle in.
Yes, and I actually live in a 1-bedroom apartment. So I either shoot it in my bedroom or for my bathroom, but my bathroom looks great because my ex helped me redecorate it. But so that's actually kind of in some ways the nicest looking part of the house. And even though really it would be fun to shoot in front of my DVD Blu-ray collection, which is actually in the foyer, just so you guys can see all my films. And then I do in fact collect other things besides horror. I actually have a wide range of interest in film. But also, so we are going to attempt to shoot an episode while we're both at TCM.
Yes, we'll see how that works.
We'll see if it works out or not. But so we could be doing that. And you did shoot one time from it. You were at TCM in Atlanta. You shot from your hotel room, and I've shot from my parents' house before. So we do change location.
But the difference, Anne, is that the next time we do this, I would hope that we could actually be together.
Yes. Exactly.
So it wouldn't be a split screen. It would just be, we would be sitting together doing this. So I'm going to try to make that happen when we are both in Hollywood for the TCM festival. I have, they work me pretty hard.
Yes, they do.
There is a day where I have a window of opportunity in there, and it would be really fun. To do this. We'll see. How would you feel about doing it with an audience?
We could do that. You might be able to. That would be fun, especially if we could take questions on the fly. That would be kind of awesome.
It remains to be seen if we could actually do this somewhere where it wouldn't be disruptive.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, maybe we could do a thing where people who watch these Ask Eddies, who are also going to the TCM festival, we can send out a little announcement if we know when we're doing this. And I could try to arrange to do it in a place where we could have people there with us. Sometimes it's really noisy, like the lobby of the hotel or something, but we might be able to find somewhere where it's feasible. So we'll see. We'll see just how much TCM cares about me.
There you go. All you can do is ask. We'll find out that burning question. And because I was thinking about that too, of just because we have people who watch our show that are going to CC. Because people tag us and stuff, and I know people, so I know that there'll be people there that that were at North City that are also going to be at TCM, and of course there's people who go to Hollywood and also TCM. So
right, I don't want to make it overly complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
But it should be a doable thing.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
Anyway,
that's it for this one.
Yes.
And I don't know exactly when this is being posted, but
this is being posted. I was going to say the same week we're shooting it, because I'm posting it the day before North City Hollywood starts, because I wanted to get this out before North City Hollywood.
Good.
Starts, yes. And then and also because obviously I can't edit while I'm at TCM.
Right. So this will be up on April 14th, and then
correct.
The 15th to the 17th is North City Hollywood, and then I'm just staying in LA. And then from Thursday to Sunday will be from the 21st to the 24th. Pardon me.
Yeah.
Will be the TCM Classic Film Festival.
Which I'm very excited about. It'll be fun.
Me too.
It's
There's
it's a really fun thing.
A lot of cool stuff that several things that I've been trying to make happen for a few years, and they're finally coming together. Like my screening of Fly By Night. Is actually happening at TCM, which is great. I couldn't get it for Noir Alley, but I got it for the festival, so that's good. Cool. And I'm excited. We're showing I, the Jury, restored in 3D.
Yes.
So it's John Alton, black and white John Alton in 3D. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you it's the greatest movie ever made, but it is John Alton in 3D. So I'm excited. I'm excited for a lot of things. Plus, I'm excited because I'm doing a whole Doris Day program, and I'm a big Doris Day fan. And they're showing the Pajama Game, which I really love. And I'll be introducing that. And I'm doing a special midnight screening of Miracle Mile.
Yeah, I saw that.
One of my, that's my like speculative fiction rather than science fiction, in that like this could have happened. This story could actually have happened. It's just speculating as to what if,
Yeah.
Love that movie. And Steve Desjarnais, the director, will be there introducing the film with me at that midnight show. So that'll be a lot of fun.
And you'll be signing your book.
I will be signing my book. I think it's on Friday at 11 o'clock in the morning in the Roosevelt Hotel lobby. But don't hold me to that. I think that's what it is. Anyway, and there's all sorts of other good stuff. I'll be introducing The Hustler with Piper Laurie, who is attending the festival. So that'll be great fun. So that's it. If I hope to see a lot of you a lot of you movie fans at the festival. That'll be great.
Okay.
Okay, Ann.
Okay.
Thanks a million, and we'll see you very soon.
We'll see you soon. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.